That's why we reported it to Child Protective Services, CPS. My mother Elizabeth said this in a trembling voice. Her tone was dripping with self-pity, like she was auditioning for the role of a tragic heroine. She weakly gripped the corner of the dining table as if she were the victim of some horrific crime. On the polished mahogany surface, her pale knuckles jutted out starkly. Even the way her fingers trembled was calculated. Perfect acting. Her eyes shimmered as if tears might spill at any second. But behind that glossy veil, I caught the glint of something cold and merciless. I clenched my jaw so tightly it felt like the heat of my rage might rupture the veins pounding in my temples. The fact that my voice didn't break was nothing short of a miracle. If I lost control here, they would win. I had to stay calm, ruthless, and present nothing but the facts, like a blade pressed to the throat. On what grounds? Because while you abandoned your children and jetted off to Europe, I was the one funding your indulgence with my hard-earned money? But you left the kids behind. My sweet babies abandoned for an entire week. Christina shrieked, her voice sharp and hysterical. Her eyes blazed with hatred, glaring at me as though I were a parasite to be exterminated, or a scapegoat on whom she could dump all the misery of her life. Her face, twisted with rage, bore no trace of the beauty people once envied. In that moment, whatever faint, fragile shard of compassion I still held for them as family shattered like glass and vanished completely. It all began with a single phone call from my mother. It was late at night, just days before the launch of a major project. I was still at my desk, bathed in the glow of the monitor, hammering out code. The ringtone cut through the silence, pulling me from my focus. I frowned as I glanced at the screen. The name Mom lit up the display and unease churned in my chest. Tracy, I'm sorry for calling so late. It's about your father. I need your help. What my mother told me about my father Richard's condition was unbearable to hear as his daughter. She wept as she described how he had lost everything. His business, his retirement funds, even his will to live. She pleaded that he had no motivation to find work again and that soon they might not even be able to pay the mortgage. It was an emotional trap too polished for any daughter to ignore. My brain was fried from endless hours of work, my judgment clouded. So please, Tracy, just for a few months, live here with us. Instead of rent, could you help with the household expenses just a little? Looking back, it was all a carefully orchestrated scheme, a trap to cage me inside the house I grew up in. But at the time, exhausted and bound by the curse of family loyalty, I only felt a desperate urge to help. And I could help them. I had the means. My name is Tracy. I am 29. I work as a software engineer at a major tech firm. In this industry, results are everything. And I had proven myself. I earned far above the average for my age, had a solid career with successful projects behind me, and lived completely independently. Since college, my goal had always been clear: succeed in my career and one day buy my own place in Manhattan, a high-rise apartment overlooking Central Park. I worked tirelessly toward that dream, saving almost everything into a special account. Those more than enough earnings and the savings for my dream were their true target. I should have realized sooner. As expected, their initial promise was quickly broken. At first, it was just utility bills, slipped quietly onto my desk. If I bought myself a nice outfit as a small reward, they'd guilt me with looks that said, "We're cutting back, but you're splurging." At night, while I worked in my room, the sound of their laughter drifted up from downstairs, stabbing through the walls like knives. It was as if there was an invisible glass wall separating their world from mine. Before long, more than $20,000 had drained from my down payment account. And it wasn't just money. Taking advantage of the fact that I was working from home, Christina began using me as a free babysitter. Minutes before an important online meeting, she shoved her 2 kids into my office, shouting about some life-or-death errand, then went out for lunch with friends. When I complained about nearly losing a client's trust amid the children's cries, both Elizabeth and Richard scolded me in unison. We're family. Helping each other is only natural. Their moralizing painted me as the selfish daughter and silenced every protest. That night, after the disastrous meeting, I spent hours drafting apology emails, explaining the situation, and promising free additional work just to salvage my reputation. Staring at my own exhausted reflection on the screen, I realized the true cost of helping family. They had trampled on my career, my time, my energy, the money I had carefully saved for my dream. All of it dissolved into the bottomless pit of their demands. And then came the turning point. The incident that changed everything. That night, I had finished work unusually early and shut myself away in my room. That room was the only place in the house where I felt I could truly breathe. My eyes burned from hours of staring at the monitor, and my throat was parched. I crept downstairs for a glass of water, careful not to make a sound. From the open kitchen, just beyond the living room, I heard hushed voices and saw a glow of light. Puzzled at who could be talking at this hour, I edged closer. The sight that greeted me stole the breath from my chest. My parents and Christina were huddled around a laptop with the travel site open, whispering like conspirators plotting a secret scheme. "I absolutely have to go to that cafe in Paris." Elizabeth's shrill voice rang out in the stillness. The moment I stepped into the kitchen light to open the fridge, Christina flinched like a frog caught in a snake's gaze. She slammed the laptop shut, her shoulders jerking with guilt. "Is something wrong?" I asked. Elizabeth forced a brittle smile. "No, nothing at all. Just some family matters. It doesn't concern you." But I had already noticed the glossy travel brochure tossed carelessly on the table. The Eiffel Tower and the Colosseum stared back at me, mocking. Suspicion coiled darkly in my chest, but I said nothing. I knew full well that no matter what I asked, they would never answer honestly. Such a futile exchange wasn't worth wasting a shred of my time or sanity. This wasn't the moment to expose their lies. I turned on my heel and returned to my room, my face expressionless. Early the next morning, my work phone shrieked to life. A client's system had gone down. Massive failure. The next 72 hours were hell. I worked around the clock, surviving only on coffee, hammering out fixes and patches. I had no space left in my mind for the household. When the crisis was finally contained, I stumbled out of my room, utterly spent, and was struck by the eerie silence of the house. Normally, Christina's children's noisy voices would be echoing through the house, but now it was so quiet it made my ears ring, as if every trace of human presence had vanished. On the dining table sat a half-finished cup of coffee, cold beside a single hastily scribbled note. "We're off to Europe. Going to enjoy the beautiful sights. Christina is coming too." I will never forget the feeling that seized me then, like my heart had been plunged into ice water, the blood draining from my body all at once. My premonition had been right, and then in the trash bin in the corner of the living room, I found the same brochure I had seen that night, crumpled into a ball, and in that moment I understood everything. They must have tossed it in a hurry while I was buried in work, trying to cover their tracks. My hands trembling, I picked it up and unfolded it, and the cheerful font of the title leapt out at me as if mocking me. Dream Europe Tour. 8 days for $4,000. just for Elizabeth, Richard, and Christina. Not a word of thanks. Not a single discussion with me. The money I had been pouring into this house had helped fund their lavish vacation. The thought made my stomach churn with fury. But the real hell arrived the next afternoon. Suddenly, the doorbell rang out, a jarring sound that felt utterly out of place in the deathly silence of the house. Suspicious, I opened the door to find a taxi driver I didn't recognize. And at his feet, standing there like two small pieces of luggage, were Christina's children. The older one looked up at me with anxious eyes, while the younger clung tightly to his brother's jacket hem. In their small hands, they clutched backpacks decorated with cartoon characters, and at their feet sat a single, badly worn little suitcase that looked painfully out of place. The driver, looking uneasy, handed me a note. Their mother prepaid the fare and told me to drop them off here, but no one came to the door, so... Scrawled in Christina's handwriting were the words, "Sorry, taking the kids along was impossible. They're yours now. Good luck." My mind went blank. I ushered the children inside, thanked the driver mechanically, and shut the door. The children stepped into the living room, unsettled by the unfamiliar silence, and stood there awkwardly with no idea what to do. Looking at their small, helpless backs, pity surged through me, stronger even than my anger. And as if on cue, as though she were watching from above, my phone buzzed coldly. It was Elizabeth, calling from Europe. "We decided to send Christina's kids back home, so take care of them. We'll be enjoying our vacation for a while." When I read that message from Elizabeth, my mind went blank. Then, in the next instant, a rage unlike anything I had ever known erupted through me like a volcano. Why go about it this way? If they never intended to bring the children along, they could have simply asked me to watch them. The moment that thought struck me, everything clicked into place like the final piece of a puzzle. My blood ran cold, and yet fury boiled up, scorching. Of course, they had known. If they had asked me directly while I was home to watch the kids, I might have refused, or at least set conditions. But by sneaking out while I was buried in work and then sending the children back only after it was too late, they had trapped me in a no-way-out situation where I couldn't escape or even complain. This wasn't simple, spur-of-the-moment neglect. It was a calculated scheme. An insidious trap designed to strip me of the right to say no and ensure I would be their free babysitter. That realization shattered the lid I had kept on my memories. Images from the past came flooding back. My 16th birthday, sitting at a lonely table, my only gift, a plain sweater my mother had bought on sale. And in stark contrast, Christina's 16th birthday. Loud music, friends, laughter. My father proudly presented her with a designer handbag while she basked in the spotlight. I stood in the corner, silent, watching. To them, Christina was the fragile, precious daughter to be protected. And me? I was the independent one, the problem solver, the convenient moneymaker they could exploit. This truth, buried deep in my chest for years, now stood undeniable before me, exposed by this Europe trip betrayal. At last, I understood the nature of my volcanic anger when I read Elizabeth's message. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was the scream of my soul, trampled for years, my life dismissed and devalued. I looked back at the children standing uncertainly before me. I could not turn this fury on them. They too were victims, abandoned by their own mother. With trembling hands, I clutched my phone and dialed the one person I could trust in this rotten mess, my mother's sister, Aunt Sandra. When my aunt answered, I forced my voice, shaking with anger and on the verge of breaking, to hold together as I briefly explained everything that had happened. After a stunned silence, her voice came back, strong and resolute. "She's finally crossed the line. Tracy, none of this is your fault. I'll come for the kids right away. Don't shoulder this alone. Do you hear me?" An hour later, she arrived as if she had flown on wings. She wrapped the children in a gentle embrace, then gripped my shoulder firmly. "Leave the rest to me. You focus only on reclaiming your life." With those words, she took the children with her. When the house fell silent again, any lingering guilt or hesitation within me vanished completely. All that remained was contempt for them, and a resolve cold as ice. I didn't reply to Elizabeth's pathetic message. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up an airline booking site. The $20,000 they drained had come straight from the down payment account for my dream castle, a Manhattan apartment. It was, without question, a devastating blow to my plans and an assault on my financial freedom. But they still hadn't realized. They didn't know my true strength. My main account, the one where my salary was deposited, was untouched. My destination, Hawaii. I had more than enough funds, and now nothing held me back. Compared to what they had stolen from me, the cost of this trip was trivial. This wasn't indulgence. This was the price of liberation, the cost of ending my life as their slave. Without a shred of hesitation, I booked a first-class ticket and an oceanfront suite at a 5-star hotel towering over Waikiki Beach. This wasn't just a vacation. It was my declaration of independence. It was the beginning of a fight to reclaim control of a life that had been treated like slavery. The instant I stepped off the plane in Hawaii, the clinging humidity and the sweet scent of plumeria wrapped around me. It was the smell of freedom, something that would never exist in that suffocating house. Standing on the suite's wide balcony, staring out at the endless turquoise sea, I realized how tense my shoulders had been these past months. I drew a long, slow breath in, then let it out, as if flushing out every stale breath trapped deep in my lungs. Being physically removed from that oppressive home cleared my mind in ways I hadn't expected. On the beach, cocktail in hand, I deliberately switched off my phone. No emergency client calls, no family demands, just the sound of waves coming and going and time that belonged only to me. How luxurious, how precious that felt. I had been a victim, but from now on I will be the author of my own life. No more playing the convenient role written by someone else. That resolve hardened in the warm Hawaiian breeze. That night, under the star-filled sky visible from the balcony, I quietly considered a future that belonged only to me. I posted a photo of myself, smiling with the blue Hawaiian sea behind me, on social media my family also used, captioned with hashtags, #treatyourself, hard work pays off, #independent woman. I wasn't saying it with words, I was saying it with action. But my response didn't stop there. Back in my hotel room, I logged into the family travel account they'd been sharing. Sure enough, it displayed the return flights they'd booked and the rest of their itinerary. Reservations at Michelin-starred restaurants, a 5-star hotel near the luxury shopping streets. Each booking was another indulgence built on my sacrifices. Without hesitation, I canceled everything. For a split second before hitting the cancel button, a flicker of guilt crossed my chest. Then I thought of the sticky orange juice on my keyboard and the cold faces of my parents who had mocked my past successes. And my resolve turned to steel. This isn't revenge. This is the first lesson in showing you the consequences of your actions. I murmured and clicked cancel booking firmly and quietly. I started by canceling their most anticipated dinner, the grand final night. Then I canceled the downtown suite. Finally, I canceled the first-class return flights. Dismantling their dream piece by piece gave me a cold satisfaction. Just imagining the panic of being stranded in a foreign country without a place to stay or a way home made my chest tighten with grim pleasure. After a week of that dream holiday, I returned home sun-kissed. And as I'd expected, my family was waiting in a fury, having somehow managed to get back on their own. The living room looked as if a hurricane had passed through. Scattered toys, food crumbs, and travel bags tossed about. Then the madness began. They put aside their own abandonment and, to make me look like the criminal who'd abandoned the children, filed a false report with Child Protective Services. They were no longer my family. They had become ugly monsters who'd gladly destroy someone for their own desire. What followed was nothing but insults. Christina screamed hysterically, "If you'd just paid all the money properly in the first place, none of this would have happened. You were stingy and forced us to cut costs on the trip." Her twisted logic made me dizzy. My father tried feebly to defend them, but his words were cut short by the hardness of my stare. There was not an ounce of guilt on their faces. Only anger that their plan had been ruined and panic at the thought that the money tree had chosen to walk away. I dismantled their arguments one by one, calmly but with an icy edge. No ill intent. You panicked? Give me a break. Can you even say exactly how much I've paid for you over the last 6 months? The mortgage, utilities, groceries, the kids' lessons, totaling no less than $30,000. I could show you the bank statements right now. Oh, and what about that $800 spa bill, Christina? The day you dumped the kids on me claiming an emergency? I paid that too. If that money had remained, the down payment for the apartment I dreamed of would already be saved. Have you ever considered how much time I wasted because of you? How many career opportunities I lost? I watched the color drain from their faces, but I couldn't stop. This conversation was the last one we would have. While you were living it up in Europe, who took care of the children? Did you think I'd throw the kids you sent in a taxi out into the rain? I pulled out my phone and shoved a photo I'd taken with Aunt Sandra a few days earlier in front of them. A picture of the children smiling, safe and relieved at my aunt's house. I've already told Aunt Sandra everything. The day you left for Europe. The fact that you shoved the kids into a taxi and dumped them on me. And now, that false report to CPS you filed just to brand me a criminal. She knows it all, and she's standing with me. I no longer needed their advice or their support. I would stand on my own 2 feet by my own will and end this rotten relationship. That resolve had already solidified under the blue skies of Hawaii. Back in my room, I locked the door and began packing. There was nothing left in that house worth leaving behind. By the weekend, with all my preparations complete, I sat at the dining table and dropped the final bomb in front of them. I'm leaving this house. Elizabeth tried to stop me, her voice desperate yet commanding. Stop right there. I won't allow you to just walk out. We need you. What about the mortgage, our lives? And the children? You're just gonna dump them on your aunt and go off to be happy on your own? That's not my responsibility. I threw back at her the same cold words she had spat at me countless times before. Then I stood and delivered my final ultimatum. I've already notified the loan servicer that I'll be halting my payments, and as I said, Aunt Sandra knows everything, including the false report to CPS. With her help, I'll be telling the rest of the family exactly how you trampled on my goodwill. I saw the blood drain from Elizabeth's and Richard's faces. For them, reputation was everything. Oh, and one more thing. I pulled a stiff business card from my bag and slid it across the table. My lawyer. He tells me maliciously filing false reports to CPS can carry legal consequences. From now on, if you want to contact me, you go through him. I will not take any direct calls from you, Christina murmured, stunned. How are we supposed to live without you? I met her eyes directly and gave my final words. That's no longer my concern. The next morning, I walked out of that house without once looking back. The sound of the front door closing behind me was like the booming cannon that signaled the start of a new life. After the lawyer's official notice was delivered, all contact from them ceased. About 6 months later, Aunt Sandra called me with news of what had become of them. It was, fittingly, nothing but the consequences of their own choices. Without me, their greatest source of money, the house quickly fell into foreclosure. Richard, once so proud, was now working in a warehouse for low hourly pay, bowing his head to colleagues far younger than himself. Elizabeth, who had always cared more about appearances than anything else, had been exposed to the entire extended family and was now shunned by all. No more invitations to gatherings, just lonely days in a cramped apartment. And Christina, raised spoiled all her life, without her free babysitter and ATM, was struggling to raise her 2 children, working days as a supermarket cashier and nights as a waitress in a diner. Even hearing all this, I felt no joy, only a quiet acknowledgement that this was the path they needed to walk, to finally face their own lives. As for me, I had just signed the contract for my new apartment in Manhattan. From the window stretched the beautiful night view I had earned with my own effort. Floor-to-ceiling windows, gleaming hardwood floors, and most precious of all, perfect silence, undisturbed by anyone. A jewel box of lights glittering across the skyline. A single voicemail from Elizabeth still lingers on my phone. I'm truly sorry. Just a single sentence, spoken in a trembling voice. That was all the message contained, and I still haven't been able to delete it. There was no trace of the performance she once clung to, only the sound of utter exhaustion. It isn't nostalgia that keeps me holding on to it. It is a hollow pity, a faint recognition that perhaps they too were victims of their own weakness and distortion. And for me, it remains a reminder, a vow to never repeat the same mistake, a cornerstone for my new life. Looking out at the night view, I drew a deep breath, quietly but with certainty, knowing at last that I had taken my life back.